FNR, Football Nation Radio.
Buzianis, no call! Score!
Salamini for Cole. Cole on the run. Shoots. 2-0.
Lazanovsky with the free kick. Launches a rocket! Trimboli, what vision! Blasts.
Yes!
That's it!
Vujovic.
Stoppelov, beautiful ball! Here's Bozanic. They might have won it!
The Pioneers with George Danikian and George Kotzanis on FNR, Football Nation Radio.
Good evening and welcome to the Pioneers. It's Thursday night. George Danikian's apparently favourite time of the week, but he's not here. He's away in Adelaide, working and earning, and I'm here alone, going solo one with our special guest who's flown in from Sydney, a young-looking, strapping lad who looks like he could still play, maybe five-a-side, but he's ready to score a goal. He's always ready to score a goal. There's goals in this man. Gary Ward, thank you so much for flying in and joining us on the Pioneers. Welcome to the show.
Absolute pleasure, George. Thank you.
And we finally get to meet. We've had a couple of false starts with the two Blasby Cups, but we've finally got here, so we're going to dig a bit, get a little bit of the background, and find out what made this hungry goal-scoring machine exactly what it was when it arrived in Australia. A lot of people know about you. The Aussie fans and the Melbourne fans know about the damage you caused here on the fields, but we want to know a little bit about the background, a little bit about what happened to the guy where it all started from, and obviously born a little while ago in a place called Luton.
Yeah.
And as I do every week, I'm going to start off with my first question, and I want to ask you about your very, very first football memory.
Okay, well, I think I'd like to congratulate you on the show to start off with. I mean, football needs as much publicity in Australia as possible, and this is a great platform, so congratulations on that. Yeah, I mean, I come from Bedfordshire, was born in Luton, but come from the countryside, not Luton itself. And you know, like all young English boys, absolutely loved football. Dreamt about it, went to bed with a ball, and the first thing you wanted to do as a 2 and 3 and 4 year old is just get out and kick the ball up against the wall. So, you know, I mean, if you come from England, it's like you know, football first and anything else is second. And I guess that's pretty much the same with a lot of countries, the passion for football. So I'm no different, and I just dreamt about being a footballer, and if I couldn't be a footballer, I wanted to be an archaeologist, so work that out.
I can't see the alignment there, but I'm sure it made sense to you. So what is that very first football memory, do you recall?
Well, you know, I had an uncle that I think he was a very talented footballer, but for one reason or another, he just didn't get picked up. He was my mother's very much younger brother, because my grandfather went off to Brooke and fought in the war in the desert. So you know, my mother was about 8 or 9 when he left, and he came back 6 years later, and you know, then my uncle was born. So there's quite this gap. So he was more like a big brother than anything else, and he loved his football and said, look, you know, I need to get this ball at your feet. It didn't really matter whether I was, you know, 2, 3, 4, and I guess he assumed that I was just going to kick it with my right foot. So he said, this is how you kick a football. And you know, it was only, and I guess from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, only ever used my right foot. And it's only when I picked up a cricket bat that I realised I was left-handed, and I could not hit anything right-handed in cricket or rounders or anything like that. So then I realised that the ball on the left side was so much more comfortable than the ball on the right. However, my brain had been trained to kick the ball with the right foot. So in a sense, that was by default lucky, because you know, I've never ever taken a penalty with my left, but I've scored some amazing goals with my left. So and I also played on the left wing, and I've played left side midfield and played very well there. So you know, I just found it very interesting that by the time I got to 8, 9, 10, you know, there didn't seem to be anything I couldn't do with the ball. Well, I guess there was a lot of people like that. I mean, like, you know, you just dreamed about it. So, you know, we lived near the primary school. The primary school had a wall, so I had chalk, and I just chalk circles. And from the left and from the right at different angles, I just practiced hitting those circles that were numbered all day and all night. Until such time as your mum came along and said, can you just hurry up, can you come home? Because it's dark, and but it didn't matter. And in the winter time, we had a tarmac where they would play basketball in the summertime, but in the winter time they didn't. So we'd scrape the ice off the tarmac, and we would just play two-touch, five-a-side. Couldn't shoot inside the semicircle. So your skill sets became. And by the way, in my village there was so many good footballers.
Yeah.
So you're playing with with boys that are older than you, that love their football, and that they come knocking on your door just saying, "Are you ready for five-a-side?" And 6 hours later you go home. So I don't know about today with all of the modern technology of boys getting sidetracked, but really that's all we had to do, and that's all I wanted to do. So I guess I felt that I was a reasonably good footballer by the time I got to 10.
Yeah, so you've honed your skills in these competitive five-a-sides.
Absolutely.
And also learning the competitive nature by playing with boys of older than yourself, and you've got to learn to protect the ball if you want to get a touch, or to score a goal and whatever. So I guess it was a way of training and schooling in football, not by design, but
well, in the winter time, we as I say, we scraped the ice off the tarmac, but we would create goals out of snow and ice, and we would use a red ball. And if the moon was up and the snow was around, you had enough light, you could just play there until 10 o'clock at night if you were 10. And in a village, no one's going to worry where you are because they know you're on the recreation ground playing football.
Yep.
So everybody watched everybody's back in a village environment. So it was good.
When growing up, what was your favourite team or teams? Do you recall? As a fan?
Well, that uncle I was talking about,
Yep.
he loved Manchester United, so he said this is the only team to support. However, coming from Bedfordshire and born in Luton, I became a bit of a Luton fan because at least you could go and see those games on a regular basis.
Yep.
And but that was the era of coming through with the Busby as manager, Sir Matt Busby, and to have Best and Law and Charlton and that particular team from the mid-60s that I could look at and just admire, and I was absolutely crazy about George Best. So I loved the way he was fearless. I loved the way that if someone came to chop him down somehow, he still landed on his feet and managed to ride tackles, and he never went down like some of them do today and say, you've blown on me, and you've scratched my side, and I'm on the deck. George Best just stayed on his feet, and I loved watching him. Unfortunately, I got to play against him as well a couple of times, which was good.
Oh, very good. So he was for a skinny young fella, and he wasn't very heavily built. He was a lightly framed footballer, but he was very resilient and could take a knock. So obviously had an influence on you.
Well, as George Best always used to say that he was first to training and last to leave. He trained like there was no tomorrow. Very, very dedicated, and he would go to Belfast railway station with his ball at peak hour, and he would take his ball against all the pedestrians coming off the trains and just in and out of them. And I realised that that's actually not a bad training routine. A bit dangerous, but that's what he used to do, and that's why he could drop his shoulder on both sides and do whatever. So I used to watch him and admire him.
So he learned his craft really of the dropping the shoulder again with necessity through that traffic. So he taught himself, again, not the greatest school that you'd recommend. Hey, go into the traffic of a train platform, but there you go. He's managed to carve out an amazing skill set that obviously set him up for his whole football career. So who else? What other major influences?
Well, Luton were an interesting team in that. They were the local team, so we go and watch Luton. Luton versus Watford was a derby. But if Luton, say, take David Pleat, for instance, I know we'll mention him a bit later because he had an influence on me, but he signed Malcolm McDonald from Fulham for £28,000, and he was a right fullback. And one night at training, he said, Malcolm, he said, Malcolm, you're going to play up front this weekend. He said, I've never played as a striker before. And within a year, they'd sold him to Newcastle. Within another year, he was England's centre forward. and Super Mac, and then he ended up at Arsenal. So isn't it interesting, those sliding doors moments of Malcolm McDonald is a fullback at Fulham 1 minute and he's centre forward for England the next, and a bloody good striker at that too.
A superstar striker, and so something in David Pleat.
Yeah, and so Luton, they used to just sign great players. They would bring players through, or they would sign somebody like Malcolm McDonald, and they had so many. John Chidozie was another fantastic player that I actually played with at Leyton Orient, but he started at Luton, and Paul Futcher, who played for England, played at Luton. Bruce Rioch, who became a great manager, but also was a really good footballer. And so many good players seemed to come through Luton, and so as a boy growing up, I'd go and watch Luton, and it was very passionate. They were a good side. They went from Division 4 to the first division in about 6 years once, with Pleat as manager. So it was exciting times.
That was before he became a football pundit that we all want to swear at.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
So take us through your junior years. Where did you play your junior or your?
Well, I went to Redbourne School in Ampthill, which is a school of probably 2,500 students. It was a big school in the middle of country Bedfordshire.
Yeah.
So a lot of villages, a lot of coaches all turned up at the high school, and so trying to get in the football team, there's a lot of boys.
Competition.
A lot of competition. However, I seemed to be good enough, and I made the first team pretty quickly. I scored a lot of goals very quickly. In fact, somebody showed me a program that said I scored 65 goals in a season for Redbourne School in Ampthill, and I couldn't believe that was my name next to it. I thought, that's a lot of goals. Are you sure that's me? But it had my name next to it, so I've got to assume that it was me.
Don't argue with the stat.
No, well, I look at some of those boys and think, my God, there was some talent. In your school there was some talent. And I think of our school, and we used to play against teams in Bedford like Silver Jubilee or Goldington, and they had some great players. And I just thought, in England, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at the England football team, on paper they always look like they should win the World Cup, but in reality they don't. But anyway, I ended up playing for Bedfordshire. So, I made the first team at school, and I was going well. Scoring a lot of goals, so you go to your county trials, and it ended up playing for Bedfordshire, and so once you're kind of in, you're in, but it's getting in, if you know what I mean. Yep. I was playing for Bedfordshire against Middlesex in the semi-final of the County Cup. I was 16, and we had to play the home leg at Luton, so we drew that 1-1, and I scored. And we played the away leg at Tottenham's ground at White Hart Lane, because that was Middlesex's home ground for, there was no one there, but it was a massive stadium, and it was good fun to be there, just to come out from underground and get up onto the surface and see this 3-tier stand and just go, oh my God, look at the size of that. There was about 100 people in it, but it didn't matter. You were there, and it was the experience. We lost that 2-1, but I scored also for Bedfordshire in that game. And some guy with a long black, looked like a very expensive coat, said to me, look, I think you could come and trial at Crewe. And I said, well, where's that? And he said, it's in Lancashire. I said, where's that? Look, this is Bedfordshire. I have no idea what Lancashire. Where's that? He said, well, it's north, put it that way. So I ended up going up for this trial, and I met Harry Gregg, and I didn't know who Harry Gregg was until someone said, he was Manchester United's goalkeeper in the Munich air disaster. He was pulling players and people out. He was a hero. But I didn't know, because he's just this guy with a really broad Northern Ireland accent, to be sharp, and he said, look, I'm going to play you in this match on Wednesday night. And he said, we're playing Liverpool reserves. And I said, oh yeah, right, okay. And he said, we're playing here, so you're going to be staying across the road in that hotel. And we've got a landlady that's going to look after you. And I thought I was just coming up for a day, but it turned out I was there for a bit much longer than that. And in that Liverpool reserves team was David Fairclough, was Jimmy Case, was Tommy Smith, who'd been injured. He was captain of the first, but he was coming back through the reserves to get some match fitness. And I started that game. They gave me number 9. I went, oh, okay. Well, it looks like I'm on the park here.
In the days when numbers mattered.
Well, yeah. I actually didn't even think I was a number 9. I thought I was more like a number 10 or a winger than anything else. But anyway, he gave me the number 9 shirt. But and for 20 minutes, I ran around like a chook without a head. I could not get hold of that ball, no matter what. But so when I got it, and it was heavy, I didn't even have the right sort of footwear on. My studs weren't long enough, and the ground was heavy. But I got greedy. I got the ball. I went, well, stuff this. And I dropped the shoulder. I went round a couple of players to the left, and then I just hit the bloody thing. And it could have gone anywhere. It could have ended up in Leeds, but it went in the top corner. Beautiful. And this guy ran up to me and he just said, mate, if you can score goals like that, you're in. And I went, oh, shit, So that was kind of the little bit of a breakthrough that I had to realise that, yeah, I can do this.
So realisation from yourself, and then obviously the peers, guys that you were playing with, noticed it, and your peers are your greatest judge, I feel.
Well, I stayed on after that. I scored. Interesting, you think about those goals. That first goal was an absolute cracker, and I don't know if I've ever scored another one like it, but it was an absolute cracker on the left, right? And we were 3-2 down, and there was 5 minutes to go, and that's when the defender, the fullback, could kick it back to the keeper. Keeper could pick it up and just kill time. Yeah. And so I went to close the fullback down and show him the line. At least we might get possession. So I've sort of cut his back to the keeper a bit off, and he pretended to play it up the line, cut back inside, and rolled it, kicked it back to the goalkeeper. But guess what? It got stuck in the mud. It didn't get to the keeper. So I flicked it around a helpless keeper and put it into an empty net, and we ended up drawing the game 3-3. So that couldn't have been any more than just pure luck. But I was
place at the right time.
Yeah, I was poaching. I was just hungry, and so I thought, well, that's not a bad start, But I was homesick. I ended up staying there and playing. I couldn't sign a professional contract because I was too young. But all I wanted to do was get back to Bedfordshire. I was just a young boy.
Home comforts.
Yeah.
What happened? You've obviously found your way back home.
Well, I ended up playing at Leyton Orient.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was so I'd gone from Division 3 to Division 2. And you asked me earlier about how I ended up in Vancouver. The Derek Posse might be a name that comes to mind for people. He was a Tottenham player, not a big lad, but a really good goal poacher, and he was like probably 14 years older than me, and he'd been playing in America. He'd been playing North American Soccer League, and he came back to train at Orient. He just said, in the off season, I'm just going to train. And he said to me, he says, who are you? That broad Cockney. Who are you like? I'll sort you out now. I mean, like, yeah. And I said, he said, you're not a bad player. And I said to him, well, I said, where'd you get that suntan? He said, I've been in the States. He said, a young boy like you, he said, I wouldn't muck around. I've been playing here for £75 a week in muddy old East London. He said, get out there. He said, get out. Get to Vancouver and play. I said, I don't know, how would I do that? He said, I'll get you a phone number. And so out of nowhere, I found myself flying to beautiful British Columbia because I was out of contract.
Yeah.
And
how long had you been at Leyton?
Only for that one season.
One season, okay.
But I found myself, and Tony Waiters had just the coach, German guy, I can't think of his name. He had invited me over, paid my airfare, and I was going to go and trial there. And when I got there, Tony Waiters had taken over as the coach. So he just said, look, you may or may not be in my plans, but seeing as we've paid for you to come out here, you should train with us and play with us. But the AstroTurf was diabolical on my body, and I found myself tearing a cartilage in the left knee. Just popped out one day, and because there's no give. It's like your top half turns around and your legs kind of drag behind, and your hips and your knees start to. It takes a toll on you. So. That was when I started getting a lot of injuries, which was a real pain.
So how old were you at this stage? 17, 18?
I was 19.
19,
yeah.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a pain. So I ended up having knee surgery, and that's before keyhole surgery. So they used to take a knife and slice it down the outside of my left knee and remove the kneecap and take the cartilage out and put it all back together and hope hope that you get back on the park, basically. And that was what actually happened to Malcolm McDonald. It was an exterior cartilage on his left knee, and he was 28 years old, and that was the end of him.
Yeah.
So I was concerned at the time but 6 weeks after the surgery, I was back on the training park. So I had a good consultant that did the job.
Okay, just trying to work out. He had a suntan, but he was from playing in Canada.
Yeah.
Oh, is there a little bit of sun there?
Well, they played in the summertime.
Oh, okay.
So, but when you come back to England in November, I've got to tell you, if you've got any colour in your face at all, you're one of the few.
You're going to stand out. Okay. Now, you started to get some offers from some crazy places.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting because I could have played in the Division 2, and when you get a taste of maybe making a lot more money, and also the adventures of playing overseas, and you look at English football in Division 2, the surfaces were terrible. Like in Vancouver, even the training grounds were like something out of it was unbelievable. The Norwegian Seaman Centre, as they called it in Vancouver, where we could just go and train. It was like first class. Everything was first class. And I looked at the muddy old pitches and I thought, you know what, I might just explore going overseas again. And so just for that one season, I played for Dunstable. It was local. I could get my fitness back and one thing and another. And this guy phoned me. I've got no idea how he got my parents' phone number, and said, did you want to go and play football? So you've been playing in North American Soccer League? I said, yeah, who are you? And he said, do you want to go and play in Hong Kong? Do you want to go and play in South Africa, Cape Town City maybe? Get some big crowds down there. And I was just taken aback by this. He said, oh, you can go and play in Sydney or Melbourne, Australia? And I said, do they play football in Australia? And he said, yeah. He said, there's a national league. So I ended up talking to APIA and signing for APIA, only for them to phone me about a week later and say, look, we've got no visa spots left. And I had been talking with Preston. I thought Preston were a National League side. I had no idea.
They're in the Victorian State
League.
Yeah,
the Victorian side. Yeah. But the money I was asking was the same as if I was asking for, I was asking the money that I would have got as a full-time player. And I ended up at Preston.
I'll hold that thought because we're going to explore the Preston
okay.
transfer and the arrival in Melbourne. We're going to have a short break and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. Thursday night, the Pioneers on Football Nation Radio with our special guest Gary Ward. We've led up to the exciting bit. April 1st, 1979, and you're no April Fool. You've arrived in Melbourne, signed by Preston.
Yeah.
It said sliding door moment, could have gone to APIA, but
yeah.
No visa spots. You're thinking you're playing NSL, but you're in the Victorian State League, but with a pretty strong club and a pretty good coach. Now, Tony Brezina was the coach at the time. Before we get into your goal exploits, have you got a little message for young Tony?
Well, I do actually. It's interesting because Facebook has been a fantastic media for all of us footballers that are connecting and talking about the game and talking about the World Cup and wishing each other well. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. It makes me very proud to be part of the Australian football community. I've, in the last 12 months, been chatting with Tony Brezina, and I would admit that I didn't treat Tony so well as a player. I came to Preston and I guess I started scoring a few goals and getting a bit of publicity. I thought that the training techniques were below par and we weren't intense enough. We seemed to
what you were used to.
Yeah, we were doing the same sort of routines, and I kept saying things like, why don't we do this, why don't we do that, we should be doing this, we should be training more, we should train 4 nights a week. We really need to step it up, and basically Tony would just say, look, settle down, Gary, it's okay, we'll get there or whatever. And I don't know, I mean, maybe I was arrogant. Maybe I thought that Australian football was a walk in the park. I didn't treat it as seriously as I should have done, and I didn't treat Tony Brezina as well as I should have done. From a professional background, I should have respected the coach no matter what, and I didn't. So I have had the ability to apologise to Tony Vazina on Facebook, and he said to me, he said, well, Gary, you need to understand that I was given a dozen CVs and I needed a striker. I wanted a striker. Preston wanted to get into the NSL. We needed someone who would really, really do the job up front. And he said, and I looked at 12 CVs, he said, and you stood out. He said, I wanted you. And he said, so I signed you. He said, the club paid for you. He said, but I signed you. And why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think, of course you did, Tony. What was I thinking? Why didn't you tell me? By the way, it was me that signed you, Gary, so treat me with a lot more respect or something, I don't know. But, and so I said to him, look, I'm so sorry for the way I treated you. And he said to me, he said, well, Gary, if you had taken it seriously, he said, there was no way you wouldn't have played for the Socceroos. He said, you had so much ability. He said, but you thought it was going to be a walk in the park. You didn't take it seriously. You scored goals because you were good at it. He said, but if you'd have really focused on it, if you'd have really said, okay, go for it, he said, you would have played for the Socceroos, no problems at all. So I got the opportunity to apologise to Tony Vazina, and I thought it was warranted as well.
That's good. Well done. How do you feel about those comments of his, though, that if you had have taken it more seriously, you had a sensational career. The stats show that you scored a lot of goals. Everywhere you went, you scored goals. But someone who'd seen you play, who coached you, who says that if you had have applied yourself or done something different, you would have been even better. How does that sit now looking back?
Well, you can't really look back. You can only say that I guess I'd become a bit injury prone, and I thought, well, look, it's am I in Melbourne? Am I here on holiday? But I can play a bit of football, make some money, save it up, go back to England. It'll all be okay. In fact, when I was back in England after 2 years at Preston, Luton offered me a contract and said, whatever you do, don't go back. You're out of contract in Australia. Come and sign for us. We're in Division 2. We really want to go places. Talking of David Pleat again.
Yep.
And he said, come down to Kenilworth Road. And I did. So I'm back in England. I go down there and I train with him and I play a friendly game and I score. He said, look, we want you to stay. And I said, no. I'd actually, fallen in love with Australia. And I thought, no, I've got mates, I've got a great lifestyle, and I'm definitely going back and signing for Preston again. But Tony was right, and that you say I scored a lot of goals, and yeah, I did. But guess what? I actually wasn't a natural centre forward. I was, there was a couple of coaches like Johnny Margaritis when I played at Brunswick Juventus, and Peter Ollerton once. They said, look, we're a bit short in midfield, Gary. Can you play left side midfield? And I was man of the match in both those games, and I scored in both those games because I ghosted in late. When I knew where to get at that time. But I was coming from way back.
Read the play.
I was coming on the blind side, and I thought, God, I tell you what, why have I not been playing left side midfield all my life? Because it's an absolute natural for me. And when Johnny Margarita said we got to go and play Marconi up there, when they had Frank Farina and everybody you could possibly think of, Jankovic playing there, he said, in '84, you need to. Can I just ask you to play left side midfield? If you look at that particular game, Marconi Brunswick Juventus '84 at Bosley Park, I scored the only goal at ghosting at the near post with a header that just crept in, and I got man of the match. And several people have said to me, well, I know you score goals, Gary, but you should be playing left side midfield. And I went, I should have been. So but what can I do?
You were signed to score goals, and you did.
Yeah, that's true. So.
Well, just to remind you, your first game was a Dockerty Cup game, and you came off the bench against Hakoah, the old St Kilda Hakoah, and a young sensational goalkeeper Billy Whiteside was in goals for them, and they had a pretty good side, Hakoah, and it went into extra time. You came off the bench, if you remember. How many you got? Two on debut and 1 assist.
But I gave Tony Vazina a hard time. You see, he said to me, look, you've come a long way. You'd be a bit jet lagged. You trained okay, but you need to. I'll bring you on.
Coach speak.
Yeah, and I said, and I got out of my gear. I took my boots off. I put my Preston jacket back on. I said, I've not flown 12,000 miles to sit on your bloody bench.
That was first game.
Yeah, and he said, well, Gary, just so I was ropeable. I wanted to get on the park.
Yep.
So when he put me on at half time, well, it was someone was asking for trouble because I was about to
explode.
Yeah,
in some shape or form.
I wasn't happy, put it that
turned
way.
into goals, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Yeah,
It did. And then the following week you had your first league game, and you scored again.
Yeah.
And then I think that season, 79, you might have had 11 after the first 9 games. There was a hat-trick in there. You could not stop scoring. You must have thought that this was going to be a great holiday for a young bloke. Just turn up on the weekend.
Well, it would be disrespectful to think that, because there were so many good players in that Preston team. I mean, when you think of George McMillan and Robbie Cullen and Jeff Faulkner, and I can roll them off.
Well, Jeff Faulkner was moved back into midfield because he was playing as a striker up till when you arrived.
Right.
So he got moved to midfield, and you've just finished telling us the story about you could have been that left-sided player, and he could have stayed up front. There's a sliding door moment, because he went on to be a very, very useful midfield player. I think he moved on to George Cross later on.
He did.
But he was playing as a striker and was moved back to midfield to make room for yourself.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, Robbie Cullen, I haven't spoken to Robbie in a long time, but if ever I needed somebody, like what Robbie would do was Gordon Flavel would always, just put him loose. He would say, Robbie's got some speed, as George McMillan had some speed as well. So,
but Robbie was your out-and-out winger?
He was the out-and-out right
winger?
winger.
Yeah.
But Robbie couldn't cross the ball to the far post. He just, because he was gathered so much speed, it was quite obvious that the speed he had, the ball control he had, which was great, that he would get as close to the byline as possible, and he would just drill it. He wasn't a far post come in and head that in type of guy. It was low and hard. So I learned early on that if I chased, from the edge of the box or from the penalty spot towards that near post, invariably, as long as I didn't run out of room, I could put it in there. So, Robbie Cullen set up so many of my goals. And George McMillan, he was insane on the park in that he was capable of absolutely anything. Like if somebody nutmegged him, let's say, accident or whatever, and they run off with the ball and they run at high speed, it didn't matter, he would be after them.
He was quick.
And he would get them, and he would win that ball back. Even if he had to run 30 metres, 40 metres, he'd win that ball back. He was gangly, he was dangerous, he was tough, and he scored goals. And I thought, with Robbie Cullen hitting the line like that, with Gordon Flavel delivering those balls, with Jeff Faulkner with his nice little touch and his ability to lay off a great pass and then come up for, say Gerrard type of player, and George McMillan creating havoc. If I played this right, I could score a lot of goals when no one was looking, if you know what I mean.
Catch everyone off guard, let all the others
do
the work.
So the Preston side was a good side, and I think we finished, was it top of the league or runners up or something like that, and then I got to go to the Rothmans gold medal or whatever it was, and did Tommy Cumming win it or Bobby McGuinness? I think I'm not sure.
No, I think that might have been Tommy's second.
We were the three that were the favourites or whatever, but it was interesting because they were going around offering us cigarettes because it was sponsored by Rothmans. But
that no longer happens, does it?
No, it was that Preston side was a good side, but whether it would have been good enough in the NSL would be another story, because there were some good players there.
Yeah. Well, you had some star players, and then you had another good season in 1980, and in 81 Preston entered the NSL. I hope I'm right. Statos will be straight on Twitter and correct me if I'm wrong. There's a few tweaks made to the squad, obviously. You got to play with some other star players at Preston, and Zarko Ajarkov is one that on this show is quite often mentioned as our guest's favourite player or the best player they've seen.
Yeah.
Where does he rank in the players that you've played with or played against in Australia, for that matter?
Well, when Preston went into the NSL, I read that I was coming back into the side and with Adson Valley because I was out with a plaster on my leg at the time. And
how did you break your leg?
Well, it was at Olympic Park against Melbourne, Croatia. There was a big crowd, and I scored after 8 minutes. I think it was a cup final, Dockerty Cup or a Buffalo. I don't know whatever it was, but there was a good crowd, and Luby Petrovsky just played a very long ball up high. Peter Blasby came out. I got up. I was Bedfordshire high jump champion, believe it or not. So if I got a run at something, I could get up high. I mean, you can see some of the photographs of me from standing positions, and I'm right up in the. So I had a ability to get up high. I got up really high and I put this ball in the back of the net, and Les Sharrock took a photograph that is beyond belief good.
Yeah,
I got to tell you,
it's a great photo.
It's an unbelievable photograph. So, but so that was after 8 minutes, and we were playing well. I went back to help the defence out, and I just turned with the ball, and I got crunched, and I was off balance, and so the studs came into the left shin, and I think everybody in the stadium heard the crack.
Who was it?
What's his name? Anti-Bulliver.
Well, he got a few in his time, didn't he?
He did. But look, I mean, you look back and say, well, look, he was doing his job.
Yeah, of course.
He might not have deliberately done that. I mean, he was probably trying to win the ball and clean me up. I mean, if you were worried as a striker about players cleaning you up, you'd never get on the park. I mean, just look at Peter Lewis. I always remember Peter Lewis as somebody. If someone said to me who's one of the toughest defenders, I'd say Peter Lewis. Steve O'Connor, Peter Lewis. You'd start with those two, I think.
They make you earn your money, don't they?
Absolutely. So.
Back to Preston.
Back to
the
Preston.
NSL. Sorry, I had to go back to the break.
So when I got on the park in '82, sort of after about 10 games, I started scoring a lot of goals because the game was faster, the game was more professional, the training was more intense, and it suited me better. So
was Ollie in charge by this stage?
Ollie was. Yeah, he was probably just about in charge by then. Yeah. And he signed Alan Whittle. Now, Alan Whittle had been playing at Everton. And I thought, God, you're signing Alan Whittle. Wow, that's, I mean, he's a seriously good player. I mean, he might be 30, 31. I mean, today, if you sign somebody that's straight out of the English Premier League, 30, 31, you'd say, that's a good signing. So Preston signed Alan Whittle. And then they had Richard Miranda, and they followed it up with Zarko Ojikov. And all he said, he didn't speak a lot of English, but he would just say, play the football, play the football, play the football. And like a bull at a gate, if he got that ball, he just moved players, opposition players off him. He just went, left and right, and he just came through. And then he would look up, get his head up, and I'd try and create a bit of space by pushing the defender back, and then come off the defender. And he'd lay it into your feet like a rocket. So if you didn't have a good first touch yourself, you were in trouble. But I did, so I was able to hold it up, and it hit the space. It hit the space, and you go, oh, I can give this ball back to this guy, and I can peel off here. So it is easy to say that Oji was probably one of the best players, but everybody for their own style. He was really good in his position, and he deserved to play for the Socceroos. But there were other players. I mean, Peter Boyle was a really good player. I mean, I don't think Gordon Flavel ever gave the ball away. And he never missed a tackle.
Miss a tackle.
And there's so that was so Preston halfway through '82 to almost the end of '83. I don't think that Preston lost a game. They might have lost one, but it was like they finished the '82 season really well. Went into the '83 season unbelievably well, to the point we were 12 points clear at the top of the league with about 8 games to go, and I was right up the top there with a goal scoring list. Claude Lucchese wasn't too far behind. We were going extremely well. David Jones at the back, Luby Petrovsky, Conor Bassinas. Like it was a really good side. And even the goalkeeping position, talking of Vancouver Whitecaps, I met Steve Potter at the Vancouver Whitecaps, and Steve, all of a sudden turned up at Preston. But Richard Wilson, who was New Zealand's international goalkeeper, he went to the World Cup in New Zealand in '82. So you've got Steve Potter and Richard Wilson competing for the spot in goal. I mean, seriously, that's a good squad. That's a really good squad. And unfortunately, when we're playing against West Adelaide at Hindmarsh, and I think I was top goal scorer in the NSL at the time, I got hit from behind, really terrible tackle again by Tim Brown. It's amazing you remember their names, isn't it? And that was it. I then didn't play the last 6 or 7 or 8 games of the season, and Preston finished runners-up.
Okay. All right, now I'm going to ask you some difficult questions. Maybe not so difficult. The best you saw in Australia and the best you played against, hold that thought or think about it, and after the break we'll come back and get your answers. Welcome back to the Pioneers on Football Nation Radio. Gary Ward is our special guest. Gary, I told you, I promised you the time would fly.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to those questions from before the break. Had a little bit of thinking time.
Okay.
The best you played with?
Well, it's too difficult to say one player, but certainly Ojikov would be there, but also Jimmy Campbell. And I think that I think at APIA, I'd say Peter Catholis. He was just unbelievable. You know, he had unbelievable balance, great vision, and whenever Rally Rasic wanted, you know, somebody to just jump out of somewhere if we were behind in a game, Peter Catholis and I ended up scoring in those games where we really needed to. So I've got to say that Cat, Jimmy Campbell and Odgikov are probably
three goal-scoring midfielders who created a lot of havoc, so they were really good
pleasure
players.
to play with them all. And we forgot to mention Dougie Brown.
Dougie.
You know, we're talking Preston. We didn't mention Dougie Brown. What were we thinking? You know?
Spill it. Give us some goss on the old Dougie, apart from him singing his own name in the
well,
warm-up.
Dougie was an interesting character. Is an interesting character. I haven't seen him for a while, but you know, you could be standing in the shower as you all did after the game. You know, you're muddy and you're just washing down and everything else, and he'd stand next to me and say, "That was a good goal, Gary," or "What did you think of my goal?" or whatever, and I'd say, "Yeah, well, Dougie," and everything. I'd think that's a bit hot down the side of my leg, and he'd be peeing on me.
Yeah.
You know, that was Dougie. He'd just be standing talking to me, but unbeknown to me, he'd be peeing on your leg. So, you know,
I think we've all had that
good old,
at some time.
good old Dougie. But no, I thought he was explosive. I mean, if one word sum him up, it was explosive. He would take the ball forward and just hit it from anywhere. You know, it would matter. I'm 25 metres out. I don't care. I'm just going to lace this thing, and invariably hit the target or went in. So, you know, I just want to mention Dougie.
No, that's good. More often than not, he did score. You're right. You're very right. You found yourself at Juventus under John Margaritis.
Yeah.
Why did you leave Preston?
Well, I think it was a mistake. I realised when I was 4 or 5 games into Brunswick Juventus that I found it very difficult to. Well, we played Preston. We played Preston at Olympic Park number 2, and I scored the first goal of the game for Brunswick Juventus. I just, you know, shrugged off Robbie Dunn and put it in the corner past Steve Potter. I remember it.
Easy peasy.
And you know, it just didn't sit well with me. You know, I just thought, you know, I know the Juventus supporters are loving this, but I don't know if I'm loving it. You know, I'm missing the Preston passion. But look, I've signed and I'm there, and what a team Brunswick Juventus was. I mean, you know, from John Dowie to Brian Brown, who came over from Falkirk, really good, solid defender, and you know, with midfielders, Paul Wade.
Yeah.
Paul Wadey in midfield, Joe Sweeney and I up front. I mean, Andrew Zinni on the wing, Robbie Cullen on the other wing. I mean, it was a good side. Yeah. But I only played the one season there, and Joe Sweeney and I think were equal top goal scorers that year. So, but yeah, you know, I always enjoy my football. But yeah, I was at Preston for 5 years, and I stepped into the season at Brunswick Juventus, and I wanted to go back to Preston.
You didn't, though. You went to Melbourne, Croatia.
I did. Well, you know, it's also again interesting. You just think, well, you know, let's go with the flow. The Melbourne Croatia were always the enemy, weren't they? When they were playing at Preston, you know, they were the opposition.
Of course, yeah.
So you know, good crowds, and they offered me a contract. So Miran Bleiberg had taken over as the coach, and he was young and enthusiastic and very vocal. But that was an extremely good side. We won cups. We won the Dockerty Cup. We won the Buffalo Cup. We won the Ansett Challenge. I mean, I was only there for a season and a bit, but certainly got some silverware. In fact, I got silverware at Preston because we won the state league, and you know, and so you know, with that, and then you throw APIA in as well. So I can't say that I haven't won silverware in Australia, because I have.
No, the records are right. They're there. So it, again, doesn't sound like Croatia was the right move for you personally.
Yeah, look, it's I think I just chased dollars because West Adelaide Hellas had started the season really poorly. I'd played 5 or 6 games with Melbourne Croatia. They had the checkbook out, and I was sort of towards the end of my career when you think about it. I mean, it's okay thinking, well, okay, I was playing a lot of football at 16, but by the time you get to 30, my God, I've had 14 or 15 years of this. I mean, yeah, but that's still young, but, you know, my hips were caning me, and I was having all sorts of, you know, 1 minute you could accelerate on the park and do yourself justice. The next minute you're saying, what is holding me back here? God, I'm tight in that side. And, you know, it was just annoying me. In fact, I think I played maybe 30 or 40% of all my football not fully fit. So that was a bit of a shame. But Neil McGackie was the manager at West Adelaide Hellas, They said to him, get the checkbook out, buy yourself some players, and let's get us off the bottom of the table. So he bought Charlie Yankos from Heidelberg, Robbie Dunn from is it Preston,
yeah.
and me from Melbourne, Croatia. So the three of us went over there, and it's really interesting because they think, well, Gary Woolley scores goals, and when you're reading the paper on a Saturday, the Adelaide Advertiser, and it says, against Brisbane Lions tomorrow, Ward's debut, he's going to score goals, blah 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 blah. You're looking at this picture of you going, God, I tell you what, that's a bit of pressure. Why haven't they got the Socceroo captain on the back page? Why am I on the back page? So I went to bed that night thinking, I'm just going to think of all the ways I could possibly score as many goals as you could imagine. Every single deflection, you name it, whatever, right? And it's 0-0 at half time. The crowd were a bit agitated, and then Honeyman goes to take this long free kick, and Robbie Dunn says to me, he says, look, you just hang around the penalty spot. Because Robbie's a tall guy. He said, I'll just head this back across the box. It will come to me. I'll make sure I get on it, and I'll head it back across the box. Then you can do your business. I went, okay, fine. Absolutely perfect. He headed it back across the box, and I headed in his header. And then I put another one over the top, over my head and into the back, and we won 2, and I scored them both. But I thought, phew.
Relief.
Talk about, because on the Sunday afternoon game, on the Sunday morning, there was more headlines, and I'm just going, hang on a minute, that's unfair. There was a lot of pressure, but in the end, I scored 2 goals and a 2-0 win. So, but that team just wasn't strong enough. Robbie, yes, you could say that Lou Histradulu and maybe the keeper position, and certainly Honeyman and Robbie, Charlie and myself,
yeah. But
there were 4 or 5 players in that team that just weren't up to scratch, and you were having to cover for them all the time. So when that season finished, Charlie and I went to APIA.
So Riley Russich was the coach then?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've had a sensational season there. You won the league. Why did it work so well? Because quite often a coach could put together a team on paper, and on paper that APIA team was sensational. But that doesn't always translate into championships or titles. But for some reason, why did that team work?
Well, it was an amazing combination. Riley was and is probably the most famous and experienced coach that Australia's ever produced. He was able to play with your head. He was able to
in a good way or a bad way, or
both.
Yeah.
But either way, it made you hungry.
Yeah.
He would put together a way of doing things. He would train you. When Michael Uricallo was a trainer, and boy, oh boy, did we right, okay, this is the hardest I've trained in all the time I've been in Australia. The pre-season was unbelievable.
So
right?
This is the stuff you were pushing Tony Brazil to do.
What it was, yeah. But so we were jumping out of our skins, and then the Australian Soccer Federation said, this season's going to be first past the post. It's not going to be a top. There's going to be a top 4 or 5 playoff, but first past the post this season will be champions. Yep. So they set the rules in place and said that's the way it's going to be. So we made a point. Riley put up this little score chart. This is how many points we need. But I'll give you one example of a game. Okay, we'd played Sydney Olympic at Lambert Park. We were 1-0 down. I actually got the winner. Charlie Yankos got the equaliser from a corner. I got the winner. It was 2-1. We won that game. The next week we got the Italian derby at Marconi, and I'm obviously scored the winner. I'm desperate to play. Guess what? I'm on the bench. And Peter Catholis was on the bench, and Cat had a great game as well. And we went, hang on a minute, what are we doing on the bench? This was a sold-out game at Bosley Park. We're top of the league. We're unbeaten, and we're on the bench. We were both fuming, and Raleigh says, don't worry, he said, I've got a plan for both of you. Well, he brought us both on just after half-time, and Cat scored and I scored, and we won the game 2-0 because we were just furious at being left off. So, you can say what you like about Raleigh, but I tell you what, for me, I just thought, this is your full-time professional coach.
He knew what he was doing, didn't he?
Absolutely.
And did you enjoy that? Like, not during the game, obviously, but at the end of it, with the hindsight, you saw that was the right thing to do.
Well, we you say you can't buy a team. A lot of players were bought by APIA that year. So Sydney City dropped out of the league, so they picked up Tony Pisano and John Porter Marini for nothing, which was good. And they'd signed Peter Drudenick and Rod Brown, who was the 19-year-old young Socceroo.
Young kid, yeah.
And they said, okay, well, look, Gary, you play up front because you've got the experience, and young Rod, and you play off each other. So Raleigh liked to play 4-4-2, which was fantastic. So you could just close them down. But we had a team of leaders. So when you look at Tony Pizzano in goal, he's just leading the charge. He's talking to everybody. You've got Arno Batonia and Charlie Ankles at the middle of the back. I mean, talk about two, war horses. I mean, goodness me. And then John Paul de Marini. I mean, he took no prisoners. And Mark Brown on the right. And that midfield. It was just such a strong midfield. If you could just imagine Peter Drdenik and Peter Catholis playing next to each other with Terry Butler and a few other people. But the average age in that team was probably 27.
Yeah.
So you could say that the very experienced side. So we knew how to win games, and we ended up. I think we from scratch might have gone 23 or 4 games unbeaten. It was a great experience.
Sensational. And it's been such a special time having you finally face to face in the studio, and once again, I told you time would pass very quickly.
Amazing.
And it's flown. Congratulations on a wonderful career, on being a pioneer, coming to Australia and contributing for almost 40 years. I know that you had some coaching time at APIA. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to go into that. Maybe that'll be the part 2 when we finally get you in the studio to do the video.
I think you'd all had enough of me by then, haven't you?
No, it's been a sensational hour. Lovely talking to you. Just before we go, we just want to refresh everyone. We're having a break for 5 weeks. The Pioneers will be back with G1 and G2. G1 will be back, I'm assured, on July the 19th. So we've got a 5-week break due to the World Cup. So we're going to enjoy ourselves and have a break. Just before we go, I just want to thank Andrew Howe, Mark Borridge, Peter Katsiris, Ralph Barber and Rodrigo Rodriguez, who have helped on air and off air in the first 35 or so shows. I'd also like to thank G1, Mr. Daniki and the Superstar, who's been terrific, and to the young superstars around the station, Athos, Josh, Damon and Nick, who make the magic happen every Thursday night. Gary Ward, thank you once again. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure, George, thank you.
And we'll see you all on July the 19th.
Go the Socceroos.
Go the Socceroos. It flies that last 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We're never going to cover everything.
Well done.
Hold on to you, that was just saying.
Oh,
You're a
you.
natural.
FNR, Football Nation Radio.
Putsianis, no call! Score!
Salamini for Cole. Cole on the run. Shoots. 2-0.
Lazanovsky with the free kick. Launches and rockets! Trimboli, what vision! Bath blasts.
Yes!
Exit!
Miljevic.
Beautiful ball! Here's Bozanic. They haven't! They might have won it!
The Pioneers with George Danikian and George Kotzanis on FNR, Football Nation Radio.